Okay, moving on to chord questions. I'm a piano teacher, and I feel like I'm really good at feeling the chords, but struggle with the words to accurately teach some of my more advanced students how to do the same. I really harp on hearing the tonic, feeling the lift of the dominant, understanding the dissonance of the leading tone, a lot like how you showed in your scale videos, but throwing the chords out seems to be harder to hear for them when they haven't been intentionally listening in the long run. Yeah, that's the key point. Remember this. The feeling states in music are, in essence, all the same in terms of type, in terms of type of experience. They're all the same. It's not like chords are sort of like sensations in your arm, and melody notes are kind of like tingles that you get in your inner ear, and bass notes are kind of like a distant sound, the memory of someone's face or something, like these vastly different experiences. They're all of the same type. And the type is easily identified at first by learning to feel the tonic, because it's the most obvious feeling state in music to people. If you can learn that resolved feeling of tonicness, which we will just are you producing it? If you can feel that and you know what that means, what was being talked about when someone says the feeling of resolution, the feeling of the tonic, the important point with that is that you can now understand in general what's meant by the feelings of music, the feeling state of music. And everything else is like that. All the scale degrees are their own particular feeling states. All chord qualities are, all chord positions are, like chord numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all this. Chord inversions are their own particular feeling states. And the combinations of them are particular feeling states, of course. So at no point do you encounter something different. It's always like this. And so for the student who has a difficulty in hearing chords, they first need to understand the concept of feeling states in general. Can they identify tonic? Can they identify scale degrees? Basic ones. Then you realize that the feeling of major and of minor and of suspended and of 4 and 5 and the flat 7 chord and all this, they're all just like, in essence, the tonic feeling. They're just different variations, different shades of that type of experience. And the important point is to hear and feel them many times and consciously identify a label of some sort with them. For some people, those labels are shapes on their instruments, as I've talked about. But here we're talking about conceptual labels, words and ideas that are put on that. If one can do the tonic, one can do it all, truly. It's just that there are so many potentials that in hearing any given song, you hear an incredible variety of various combinations. And if your mind is not yet primed to parse these in a sort of separated way, bass, harmony, melody, position, quality, and so on, it just comes as a blob that you are unable to, the feelings are there, but they're all so, as they naturally are, intermingled that you're unable to sort of pull them apart. Ear training is the process of learning to pull apart through labeling and so on. So that's all that's required. The student just needs to understand that what you're listening for is not something of a different kind. It's just the same type of experience, but now it sounds like this. If you've been hearing, whatever, we do this, and then you hear this sound, that's the flat 7 sound of the key of C. And if that's something that's not clear to you, you just haven't heard enough flat 7s while you've been conscious that that's the flat 7 sound. If you do it enough, you'll just be able to recognize it. It's no different. It already feels the way that it does. That part is done. You don't need to figure out how to feel it. It's just a matter of mentally partitioning that feeling off and saying, that's something. When that's not happening, there's just this continuous flow of feeling, which I talk about as also being an important thing to do, and I call baby listening. I have another video talking about that, of being with that. But when we're talking about ear training, we're talking about not baby listening. We're talking about mentally partitioning off sections or aspects, portions of the musical flow, calling them things in an abstracted way, and then remembering that, basically. And that's all that it is. Next question is, I've noticed that even if I'm familiar with the feeling of the degrees, when I combine them, they don't seem to just be a combination of the two feelings, but instead create an entirely new and different feeling. Or perhaps I'm not listening correctly or not experienced enough. I thought if I learned the feelings of the degrees, chords would reveal themselves to me through the combination of the feelings of the degrees. Is that right? Or will I simply have to learn the feeling of each specific degree combination? That, as I just said. There are people who say that they hear chords as being just hearing all the degrees which are present at once. Like they hear a 4 chord as being 4, 6, and 1, the feeling of the 4, the feeling of the 6, and the feeling of the 1 in terms of melodic scale degrees. I don't. I can break it apart and hear those individually, but that takes effort from me because I've not trained to do that, and I don't practically care that much about it, honestly, because it doesn't seem like it would serve me that well. You're exactly right that, and this is the case with so many things in life, that the combination of two things don't just produce two things stuck together. It's a new experience. It's something that transcends the two, and you arrive at something different, something other than, even though, again, the feeling of the chord is of the same kind as the feeling of this degree and as of this degree. When you put them together, it's a different shade of this musical feeling thing that we're talking about, these feeling states. So yes, from my perspective, you have to treat each chord type, like quality, and position as its own feeling state. And they will combine again to create more like meta states, because major can be applied to the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, but could be applied to the modal chords, flat 7, flat 6, flat 3, flat 2, blah, 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 or it could be applied to chromatic chords or chords from outside the modal framework altogether, like 3 or 6 or natural 7, whatever. These are chords that are not these chords are not present in parallel modes like Lydian, Dorian, all this stuff. Those ones I just mentioned, you don't find a major chord on 3, you don't find a major chord on natural 7, and so on. But they're still major chords. So there's a combination effect that happens of individual degrees come together and they form a meta experience that we call a chord. And then chord qualities come together with their positioning relative to a tonic and a key, and they form a meta thing again, that becomes 4 major or flat 6 major or whatever it is. So, yeah, the fact is there's lots of these, but that's fine. It's fine. You just start with the basic ones, and over time you gain familiarity with those, and the rest become easier and easier because you start to get the idea. You get the idea. You understand sort of how it goes, how you become familiar with, how to best integrate these for your own mind, the way that you uniquely understand and integrate these feeling states. So yeah, to reiterate, personally, I would not focus too much on trying to hear all the individual degrees of a particular chord as they relate to the tonic, but rather focus on the meta experience. Even then, progressions become a meta experience even above that, such that when you hear a 2-5-1 or a 1-6-4-5 or whatever, literally any common progression, it becomes its own holistic experience, which is recognized not through the individual parts, although it could be, but through the whole feeling of the thing. Likewise, the chord is recognized through the whole feeling of the thing, not the individual parts, even though it could be. And the notes are recognized through this meta thing, even though an individual note played on an instrument is made up of many individual frequencies. And if you attempt to, you can hear them. When you play low notes, I can't whistle. There's a major third. There's a bunch of frequencies, a bunch of harmonics in there. Oh, that's the wrong button. But if you spend time listening to that, to the guitar, to your own voice, to literally anything, you'll hear all the separate harmonics and you realize even a single note is a kind of chord. And we don't perceive it as all these individual things. The mind does this integrating thing where it takes all of these frequencies and understands, oh, they all relate to each other in a certain way, and zoom, it becomes one thing. Then the notes come together and zoom, they become one thing called the chord. And the chords come together and zoom, they become a progression, and so on. It's just the same process over and over and over again, at these different scales or different levels, basically. Next question. My single note recognition is solid, and I can grab the chords of my instrument quite quickly, but often the inner voicings take me forever. I quickly know a chord is C major, with C on bottom, E on top, but damn it, are the middle voices G and E, or G and another C, or... Yeah. This is the thing, right? It's like... This is the integrating thing, the integration thing, is that the ear is going to integrate everything together. It's trying to do that, and you are now mentally trying to undo that. It's just like in the previous example, if you were unable to hear the individual harmonics of the notes that I was playing, it's just because you've never tried. And if you try it a lot, you start to become quite fast at it, to the point where I hear people speaking and I can hear the individual harmonics in their voice and what makes the timbre of their voice sound the way it does. That's just because I spent a lot of time in my life working with synth patch creation, which deals very directly with harmonics and their relationships together. And you start to hear the effect of individual harmonics on a given tone, and now I hear it in people's voices. Even though I never tried or wanted to do that, it just happens. So here too, your ear is expressly attempting to integrate all these notes into a single whole, and then you're trying to say, no, undo that and tell me what are the inner voices of this chord. It's hard to do because you're going against the thing that it's already trying to do, but it's not impossible. You can absolutely do it. Again, it's just a matter of setting the intention in your mind that that's what you're trying to do and repeatedly attempting, and it will start to come. Although you will encounter all sorts of difficulty with it because there's all sorts of interactions between harmonics that create sort of phantom frequencies and harmonics that you think you're hearing, but you're actually not, that are generated just through the interactions of the notes. The person didn't actually play those, but you're either hearing harmonics of the notes they're playing or tones which are generated by combination or difference of the interaction of the notes that are in there. Like I said earlier, though, there will be times when you do just, if you need to get specific voicings, which happens, depending on what you're trying to transcribe, then you're just going to have to brute force it, or I am, because I don't have enough experience nor enough desire to gain the experience to be able to hear a big chord and just go bang, here's all the notes in there. Obviously there's people who can do it through other means like Jacob Collier or Rick Beato's son or whoever, who have these amazing perfect pitch abilities where their ear is straight up fast Fourier transforming the chord, pulling things apart, and can just hear all the individual components. The average person can't do that because there's no need to do that. There's no reason that the brain would try and do that. It's doing the opposite, actually. It's cohering them together like we do with words or whatever. When you hear a word, you hear it as the whole, as a coherent unit, not as a bunch of individual syllables, even though you could go back and think, what were the individual syllables in that word? Syllables, But when you hear syllables, it just goes, boom, here's the whole, right? and the pulling it apart takes more effort. But probably if you try to do that constantly pull apart every word you hear into syllables, I bet you'd get real fast at it. How can you tell if the lowest note being played in a chord is actually the root in the harmonic context? Inversions make it harder for me to hear chord changes. So the question, to be clear, is being able to hear whether the bass note of a given chord is the root or if it's the third or the fifth or the seventh of a given chord. Is the chord inverted or is the chord root position? I repeat myself, inversions are specific types of feeling states. Root position is a specific feeling state, period. If you can't tell them apart, you haven't tried enough. That's all that it is. You need to spend time at your instrument or in some other way consciously playing them and identifying them. Play them in progressions and hear what they do. There's so many progressions which use inversions, depending on the kind of music you listen to, I should say, that you can work with, and they don't sound the same. Here's C over E. Oh, I'm in the wrong octave. Here's C over C. Come on. The root position is like, this is it. It's just perfectly solid. The first inversion is whatever that is. People have all sorts of ways they describe it. I'm not going to describe it in any particular way. You know that. You can feel whatever this is. It doesn't feel like this. It feels like that. Second inversion. Listen to the bass note and feel the quality that it has. Compare it to this. They have very distinct feelings to them. So once you practice, you can hear an inversion like that. You might not even know what the whole chord is, but you can know that it's inverted because the bass note itself feels like the degree of the chord which it is. It feels like a 3 or a 5 or a 7. It doesn't feel like a 1, and a 1 has this bang feel. The other ones have the whatever they do feel to them. And you'll learn to identify that just as much as you learn to identify anything else. There's nothing different about it. It's a matter of repetition. It's a matter of consciously naming them and a matter of just, repetition, but the amount of times you've experienced it consciously. The last question here is, I can already hear simple chord progressions really well, but when chords have extensions is where I'm getting tripped up. Is there a good starting point you recommend for getting better at hearing chord progressions with 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths? They start to blur together a lot for me. I can vaguely hear whether it's major or minor. That's about it. Yeah, really extended chords lose their major and minor identity to a certain extent. They become very pastel soft. I don't know how else to say it. They have their own thing going on, and that's something you got to learn through repetition. So you need to first isolate extensions and hear them on primary chord types. You play major and you play 9. Then you play, I won't play 11, it's going to clash, but we play 13. And you realize, here's 13 or 6, here's 9 or 2. It's different. Both. Every combination of them is going to produce a different meta experience. And in the end, for me anyway, these sort of different meta experiences, I learn them individually. I don't hear every individual extension. When I hear a big chord, get played, I can't just suddenly go, here's the 9, here's the 11, blah, blah, and just sing them. I'm not hearing it like that. I can tell you immediately that's a minor 11th chord, or I could tell you that's a minor 7 add 11 chord with no 9, or that's a minor 9 chord with no 11. But those types for me are different. Those are individual experiences. Minor 11 is different from minor 7 add 11, is different from minor 9 with no 11. They're all individual experiences, and then I can try and work out the individual voicing and find the particular degrees that are in there. But at first blush, it's just, I know that's that chord type because I've played them a lot, I've heard them a lot, I've done my ear training apps that use them a lot, hear them in music. That's how it works for me. So you want to isolate the degrees and the chord qualities. You need to hear major 7, then you need to hear major add 9, you need to hear major 6, major add sharp 11, and you hear the combinations. Major 9, major 6 9, major 9 sharp 11, major add 9 sharp 11. You just start to do all the different combinations. You're not going to do it today or tomorrow or in the next week. This is years of playing music and being conscious of what it is you're playing and what you're hearing. Because like I say, there's so many combinations and I've not learned them all. Probably there's some people out there who've played, jazz or modern classical or something for their whole life and are also very much on this sort of ear thing. And they probably can tell you all of them by ear. And, I'd be curious to talk to that kind of person and know what that's like. But I know what it's like for me. And I identify the stuff that I've spent time with, and I don't identify the stuff that I haven't. That's it.